Good evening. My name is Shagun Idowu, and I have the privilege of serving as the President and CEO of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. I want to welcome all of you to our On the Mark event, where we'll discuss one of the most critical topics facing the Commonwealth, building an economic agenda for Black women. I regret that I'm unable to join you live for this important discussion tonight. In addition to the impactful work that I am proud to be a part of and to serve alongside a team like Jessica and Michelle and Camila, I also have an opportunity to support the first Black woman to be mayor of the city of Boston, Kim Janey. And tonight, her transition team is meeting to discuss how we actualize many of the things that you'll be discussing tonight. Black women play a crucial role, if not the most crucial, in making our communities successful, all communities. Prior to the pandemic, Black women were the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs. During the pandemic, the role of Black women as thought leaders and essential workers, caretakers, and policymakers have ensured our survival. And it was a Black woman who led the team in developing the vaccine that will get us to that soon-to-be-realized dream of a post-pandemic world. Black women play a crucial role, if not the most crucial, in making our communities a success, all communities. The discussion tonight is part of BECMA's larger mandate and strategy of supporting Black women and aiding their success. As an organization with a team made up of a majority of Black women, guided by a board that is majority Black women, supported by a membership that is majority Black women, operating in communities led by majority Black women, we know that our advocacy cannot be limited to words, but must also be tied to action. That's why I'm grateful to have people like Representative Chynah Tyler, Bithiah Carter, Pam Eberhardt, Sharon Fisher, and Paris Alston leading this conversation tonight, because they are not only thought leaders, but they are practitioners, not only in their industries, but in their everyday lives. Their contributions tonight, along with your feedback, is going to help guide the forward direction and movement of BECMA and our partners. I'm grateful to you all. I wouldn't be who I am if I did not at some point throw in a proverb. And I'll leave you with one that I often carry with me wherever I go and where I speak. It's a Chinese proverb that tells us that if we want 1 year of prosperity, grow grain. If you want 10 years of prosperity, grow trees. But if you want 100 years of prosperity, grow people. Tonight, every night, every day hereafter, we are an organization that pushes our Commonwealth and our city to invest in people, in particular, in Black women, because we know that these investments will yield dividends, not only for our city, not only for our Commonwealth, not only for our country, but for the greater cosmos, for this generation and future generations to come.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Shagun. I know he's not here in the flesh, but his presence is felt. And so my name is Paris Alston, and I'm going to be your moderator this evening. And I want to thank the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, and I want to thank our panelists and all of you who are tuning in for being with us tonight. To tell you a little bit more about me, I am originally from North Carolina, born and raised. I went to UNC Chapel Hill, and then I moved to Boston in 2016. to work as a journalist at GBH News. And then I went on to work at WBUR, which is where I work now, as a producer for Radio Boston and a host for Consider This. And I'm also, as Jessica from BECMA always reminds me, an MBA candidate at Boston University, which is a really exciting endeavor. And I want to introduce each of our panelists. I'm going to have them say a little bit about themselves. So let's start with Charran.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sharon Fisher. I own a union construction company in Worcester, and I am obviously a minority woman-owned construction company. I'm also signatory with the laborers, the operators, and the carpenters. I'm happy to be here.
And Bethiah?
Hi, good evening. I'm Bithiah Carter, President CEO of New England Blacks in Philanthropy. Our goal is to inform, reform, and transform philanthropy. I am delighted to be here today with all the esteemed women that are on this panel.
State Rep Tyler.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Representative Chynah Tyler. I am the state representative of the 7th Suffolk District, which includes parts of Boston. I am the chairwoman of the Boston delegation and also the chairwoman of the Massachusetts Black and Latino Caucus. I'm a Northeastern graduate, 2011, and very, very proud to be here as a young woman, as a mom, and as a Black leader here in the Massachusetts legislature. Thank you so much for having me.
Pam?
Good afternoon. I'm Pam Eberhardt. So great to be on this panel with these awesome women. I am head of regional public affairs and community relations for Fidelity Investments. I'm originally a Texan, and I moved to Boston almost 33 years ago for law school, and it just stuck on me. And I'm excited to be here tonight.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, all so much for being here. I think our audience is in for a real treat with this panel. We've got a diversity of experiences and backgrounds. I'm really excited, and I know they are too. So let's jump right in and talk about what economic equity actually looks like in practice for Black women in their work and in society. And Charran, I'll start with you. Well, Charran, I think you might be muted.
I'm sorry. Unfortunately, equitable workplaces cannot exist without diverse leaders and equal opportunities and fair pay. And luckily for me, I'm in the business where my employees are union. So I do have the benefit of equal pay across the board. I hear from a lot of my colleagues that it's unfair. It's just trying to get through and break into the club, so to speak. And you can't do anything about it until you actually acknowledge it, that it's an issue.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Bethiah, I'm going to invite you to weigh in on that, but I'm also wondering if you can give us a little bit of a look at how the pandemic has uniquely impacted Black women in particular as well.
Yes, I will. And thank you. I think Charran is absolutely right that we need diverse leadership, but we also need to look at where did we come from with this notion about equity and equality for women. Why is this not happening? What's the narrative that's feeding into this negativity? And I think part of the negative that feeds into the negativity is the fact people question, do we work? And are we working? I mean, I'm going to make this really real. There's this narrative about us that we don't work as hard. And what we know as Black women make up 46.8% of the workforce. Yet, of the women's workforce, Black women make up 53% of that. So we are in the workforce. We are working hard. But why does this narrative persist? And I think it persists because we have to look at both the soft and the hard skills. We have to look at both equity, not just from the lens of, okay, I'm hired, but what happens to me after I'm hired? How do I progress in my field? And so what happened in the pandemic many of us turned to become more entrepreneurial because the workplace kind of became a little bit worse. And I'll read you some stats. Black women said during the pandemic, and this came from McKinsey, that they didn't feel like they could bring their whole selves to work, particularly after George Floyd, particularly after Breonna Taylor. How do you talk about that? Who's listening? They're not comfortable. 42% said they're not comfortable in sharing their thoughts about racial equity compared to 19% of all women. 15% said they felt a grieving or loss that they couldn't talk about compared to 6% of white men. They felt 22% said they can't talk about the impact of current events that they're having on people in their community. If I can't talk about it, I can't bring my whole self. And the pandemic, this twin pandemic, has weighed heavily on us. And even the way our allies work with us. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But when people talk about they're an ally to us, they're not showing up in the ways that we're expecting. So we're coming out of this pandemic with, we have some people that have listened to us, some people acknowledge, some people say, I see discrimination, but that's not everyone. And we have to remember, still nearly half of this population voted for Donald Trump. What does that mean? Those people are in our workplaces. Those people are promoting people. What does that mean, particularly for Black women?
Mm-hmm. And Pamela, I'm curious about your take on this question, because you work in the corporate world, and so much of some of this activity we saw after the protests over the summer and after the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, the list goes on, was about this. What a lot of people call this performative allyship and performative diversity, right? But how does that boil down to when you're in the workplace, when you're especially in a corporate setting, and we need to start talking about that equity, right? And that's part of how we achieve that diversity and that equity.
Yeah, I'd say one of the most important things is to be, I think Bethiah mentioned this, is to be authentic. And come into these corporate environments bringing your experiences. I mean, I think that when we're sitting around the board tables, we can make things change by bringing the experiences of ourselves, our communities, so people can understand that there are different ways of doing things. We all know that outcomes are better when you have a diversity of thought. And if we're in these corporate environments, we're there, I feel, for a reason. And a reason is to sometimes change the conversation. Oftentimes people speak of this analogy of diversity, inclusion, and equity by using the example of a party where diversity is being invited, to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And I think equity is having the opportunity to change the music so that it works for you and works for people in our communities. So I think we have an obligation when we're in these corporate settings to make clear to everyone that things are not always the same. They look different and they can be better. So I think we have especially now, many corporations have expressed their intentions about what they're going to do. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of critical and courageous conversations, and that's great. But now we need to hold our companies accountable for turning those words into action.
Absolutely. We want to be able to get on there and put some Beyonce and MJB and Lizzo in queue.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Rep. Tyler, we're sort of approaching this post-pandemic world, right? At least we would like to hope that we are, with the rollout of the vaccine, with reopening in Massachusetts. But we know that so many people have been devastated economically by this pandemic. And with that, when we look at this post-pandemic world, what are the opportunities that we have to create more economic mobility for Black women as we're emerging from this?
So the short answer to your question is data. We know that millions of dollars have been dispersed when it comes to COVID relief funds here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And in the past, honestly, those dollars have not been accounted for, particularly to Black women. So we're currently ensuring that data is being collected so that we have accountability to Black women as far as the disbursement of those funds and the allocation of those funds. But it just doesn't stop there. As Black women, we are natural activists, we're natural doers, we're natural responders when something happens. And so I was really, really proud to partner this year for the 4th year in a row, particularly during the pandemic with BECMA, amongst many other organizations, to be able to make sure that our small businesses thrive. I have a challenge called the Massachusetts Black Restaurant Challenge, well, the Boston Black Restaurant Challenge, but we're expanded to Mass now, where we're challenging patrons to be able to eat at one Black restaurant per week during a month of Black History Month, because a Black business, particularly a Black women-owned business, is 80% likely to fail during its first year. And we had a lot of Black women who began restaurants over the past year, and we did everything we could to be able to make sure that they can continue to thrive. And so I'm proud to say that we were successful as a collective and patronizing those places, and a lot of those restaurants are still thriving today.
That's good to know, and that's an awesome initiative. And yeah, it's a good plug too, to make sure that people get out to those restaurants and to those businesses. And Charran, I want to invite you to respond to that as well, since I know that you're an entrepreneur, you know all about this.
Well, I just want to say that Black women are, excuse me, the most disadvantaged and disempowered group in our society. And I think it's important to point out that with the pandemic, the highest number of people to lose their jobs were Black women, because a lot of us are employed in the retail industry, in the health industry, in the hospitality industry. So we were hit especially hard coming out of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. And Charran, I want to allude to something that Bethiah had mentioned earlier, that Black women were the largest growing entrepreneurship group. And then, of course, COVID happened and all of that crumbled. It's true for many people, but we know that Black women were disproportionately affected by this. And, I'm wondering, even before then, what was the access to capital like? What were the opportunities? Where were Black women starting out when you're looking at the blocks here for people who are going out and wanting to start their own businesses? And how has that changed now?
Right. So speaking from my own experience, typically when you're starting a business, it's always about capital, right? That's the number one thing. Capital, cash flow. How are you going to run a business? And, most people don't realize it's very difficult for minority businesses in general to secure financing, to secure loans, but yet we pay the highest interest rates. And, I think that's one of the big roadblocks. And a lot of people don't even bother trying to apply for a loan, because of it's just, and it's terrible, but it's been proven. We have banks that have been sued over this. And I don't want to mention names, but it's unfortunate because it's the biggest roadblock to starting a business. I think, and even now I'm a bit more established, but one of my number one concerns every week is payroll. How am I going to make payroll? Am I going to have enough cash flow? You really need money to make money in growing your business. You have to reinvest. And I think that's really the key, which is why so many people fail. So many, minority businesses fail, minority women businesses in particular.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Bethiah, go ahead.
Charran, you raised some excellent points that I want to talk about, particularly pre-COVID and what is this going to mean post-COVID. So too often we're all ready to cite the numbers that are actually wrong, that Black people have $8 compared to white people have $2.50. Actually, those are not correct numbers. But even so, and the Federal Reserve won't say it. So will not now come out and say those numbers. But that sets a narrative. It sets a narrative about us that we're a deficit. So why would you invest in a deficit? Then number two, what we don't do, we don't question what's behind that $8 or what's behind that $300 or $3,000, whatever that number is. Why does it exist? And I'll tell you, we did some research with the Federal Reserve because we wanted to tackle that number and what was in and go behind it. What's behind it is a devaluation of Black people, particularly Black women. Our assets are not valued the same as our white counterparts. Our interest, our loans, we are paying more for interest. There was an article that came out in the Commonwealth magazine that even talked about my neighborhood, Milton, where people were paying for higher interest rates that they didn't need to pay for because they had good credit. And just because someone hands you a credit package with a smile on their face, but that number is 400, 500 basis points more, that's where the Black tax comes in. And also when we think about that, we have to read the way that our assets are valued, predominantly our home, compared to our white counterparts. We've seen the articles that came out in the Washington Post. We're not getting those same numbers. All of that plays into our equity and my ability to get money. My ability, what money costs for me is how I'm valued and where we can take action. I have never seen yet, and maybe they're out there, a Black appraiser of my home or my business. We need to ask people, I want to see a diversity of appraisers. I want to know why I'm appraised at this level. There are structural things that we can do that really can help us, but we're not doing. So now everyone wants to give us a grant. Oh, great. What happens after COVID? What happens when the grant runs out, when I need capital? When I want that stream of capital 10 years from now, how do we make sure that pipeline remains and I'm not charged more for my capital as my white counterparts receive the same numbers, and it goes back to the same numbers that they were receiving before?
Could I just add on to that, if you don't mind, and particularly
Yes,
around women-owned businesses and just minority-owned businesses in general? And I'm speaking from the perspective of a large company. The way that we could help is through the supplier chain, and actually look, at our contracts, just as we're looking around the table or we're looking on the Zoom sort of Brady Bunch screens, and you look at people and they all look alike except for maybe you or me. So we should also look at our contracts and just see, is there diversity there? And if not, companies can be more proactive and trying to bring in more diverse suppliers, and then also challenge their suppliers to do the same thing. We're only going to renew if in fact you do the same thing as us and bring in some diverse talent. And sometimes it takes some effort, just like recruiting. And it's not just easy if you're going to your same Rolodex, because that is not diverse. If you're just going to the same suppliers all the time, you're not going to achieve diversity. So like BECMA and other organizations who have many members who are diverse, I think companies can do a lot more in that area and seek out those people who could add additional value to their companies through diversity.
And that gets measured, gets done. It's not just seeking. We have to measure this and press the gas on the state to say, you will not do business with people who will not do business with us. We need the metrics behind it. We need numbers. We need to make it public where it's not difficult to find as well. And I love what Pam is saying. She is absolutely right. And philanthropy can do their part as well. This is not just about grants. There's a whole supplier pipeline that happens in philanthropy. Philanthropy purchase papers. Philanthropy have to clean their place. Philanthropy they have investors. We need to hold the fire, everyone's feet to the fire to include us. And not just us, I want to see gender as well. I don't want to come up as a Black woman last because, oh, we didn't think about that. We didn't look at gender. We need to look at all of it and make sure those metrics are loud and transparent.
And I want to give a nod to BECMA because they have been doing some really important accountability work around the city of Boston and around in the state as well about their contracts with minority-owned businesses. So I think we want to see more of that, right? More of that holding people's feet to the fire and say, these businesses exist, they're here. Why aren't they being utilized? And why aren't they being supported? Important to. And Rep. Tyler, I'm curious about your thoughts on those sorts of accountability measures. And then I also have we have an audience question for you, asking if you can talk about the community development block grants and how organizations can access them and CARES Act funding for communities.
Yes, absolutely. And so I really, agree with all the three panelists who spoke, because that is something that's at the center of what we're facing right now. And that's the reason why, funds don't get dispersed adequately, or they're not equitably dispersed. There are two bills on the docket right now, one that I filed, and a couple of my colleagues too are interested in this issue topic. And we've kind of been wrestling with this issue topic over the past couple of years over equitable access to contracts. Speaking of construction, the construction industry, we're just not getting equitable access to contracts when it comes to doing business with the state. And so there are two bills that we filed. One is about equitable access to contracts, and the second one is focused on subcontracting, because they're two different industries and they're two different workforces. And our goal is to be able to make sure that we're collecting data when it comes to ensuring that Black women are accounted for when we get access to these contracts. And so that's one. And I want to kind of redirect and talk about the workforce a little bit, because we're talking about kind of overarching themes with contracts and business contracts, but the workforce, we're having a ton of issues with workforce as well. For example, this year, we had an opportunity to take a look at different workforces, and one particular workforce that the numbers were exacerbated when it comes to Black women, and even more so now during a pandemic, was the firefighter cadet workforce, where it's 93% white and 73% male. And so we kind of start to unpeel the layers of the onion there, and we noticed that with every workforce, those numbers are very similar across all workforces. And one workforce that I'm very, very disappointed about that we've been able to spring into action and actually do something about was the marijuana industry. We haven't created a new industry since Prohibition. The marijuana industry is the first industry that we've created that we've created, just period. And those numbers, that 93%, 73%, are very, very similar in the marijuana industry. And so we've been able to establish seed money into workforce and development programs to ensure that Black women and people of color in general have equitable access to those workforces. And on the community block grants, I'll keep it short and just say that I've been a super partner with BECMA in ensuring that our communities have access to those opportunities. And what BECMA has done, and I'm not speaking for BECMA, but I'm a fan of BECMA, so I will here in the space, is to be able to make sure that we're putting on how to access these grants type of workforce spaces, so that folks can, again, like one of our panelists said earlier, learn how to apply for these grants. If you're just a small women-owned business and it's your mom and pop shop, and you just own a corner store, or you have a designer store, or you own a smoothie shop like Cafe Juice up in Mattapan, you don't have the funds to be able to hire a grant writer to be able to have access to these funds. And so, a lot of these applications are very, very difficult to be able to take on. And our folks are just not getting access to those grants. So I really wanted to thank BECMA for all you do in ensuring that our folks have access to these funds, and we will make sure that we do what we can on the back end in the legislature to make sure that we're coordinating so that all Black businesses that have applied, which is the case today, had access to those funds.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think companies also, if I can jump in, because I always think companies can do a lot more. And I would say, companies have the resources and the skills to help these small businesses. And oftentimes, even with Fidelity, we do a lot around volunteerism, and we do it with nonprofit organizations. We can also think about how we can help small Black-owned businesses. So when it comes to applying for like the PPP, the companies have accountants, right? And companies have lawyers, and they have people with all of the resources to help these small businesses apply for these loans. They have banking relationships. Oftentimes people in the smaller businesses don't have those banking connections that are crucial when it comes to, like PPP. So there are ways that companies can help and just figure out ways through the skills-based volunteerism.
And I agree with you, Pam and Chynah, but I think also we have to walk into a new space of philanthropy. The grants do not have to be difficult. We saw from PPP, that grant application was maybe one page, maybe two. I remember finishing it and thinking, this is it? What's wrong? We do not need to make this onerous, particularly if we're trying to help people. And so there's an opportunity, and I love the work that BECMA is doing, but there's an opportunity for all of us to do better and help walk people along this process. Because I think one of the things that we're keep putting out this mantra that we need more financial literacy to compete with our white counterparts. We need to be better to compete with our white counterparts. And that's not necessarily true. What I will say, for the most part, I feel like Black people do have financial literacy. You know, we're the ones that's taking a dime and making it $1 and finding ways to cut corner. While there's a need for financial literacy education, and I think for everyone, it's the access to opportunity that doesn't necessarily exist at the same level for everyone. I have not found that white girls know more about money than Black girls. They have a different access, they have a different opportunity, and they have a different pivot point to get in. How do we create that for our children as well? How do we take on this responsibility and start thinking about our future younger? Not when you're 18, not when you're 21, but we're thinking about you when you're in middle school. We're thinking about you when you're in elementary school. We actually put on a program called Lemonade Day every year for kids for 4th graders. I have never seen such proficient bankers in my life than 4th graders. All of a sudden, they're holding that money and they're thinking, and they had to do a presentation to us, a pitch to get their money. It was amazing. We don't give our children opportunity to shine. And that's what we need to make sure we do. Build that financial muscle in them, but also give them the opportunity to use it and to shine and instill in them, we believe in you, we believe in your assets, because the media and others tell them all the time, you don't have enough knowledge in finance, your education is bad, your community is bad, your parents are awful. We have to change this narrative. If we want it, we need to change the narrative to talk about the future that we want to see and instill that in our children early and often.
I'd like to, underscore that point, because that's very important to me as someone who is very interested in education. Our students are just, particularly our Black students, aren't ready to compete upon a graduation of 12th grade. And so please let me know how I can support that program for our students, because I want to make sure that they are competitive, because they can learn. We have some of the best institutions here in our backyard, MIT, Harvard, Northeastern, and there's no reason why our students aren't competing to get into those schools. So please let me know how I can support, and I'm happy to do so.
But this all, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, Bethiah, and what also happens, you're exactly right. What also happens when our kids learn, and particularly those in the middle school and younger, they go home and share the knowledge. High school kids, now I have an 18-year-old, she's not sharing knowledge with me. But if you get someone, those kids from like say 6, 7, and 8, they share the knowledge. Fidelity does a lot of that in terms of financial education with middle school kids. And one in particular, there was a little boy, 11 years old, in middle school in Roxbury. He went through a financial literacy course at Fidelity. When he was done, he came and he was so excited that he had finished the course. But what he was more excited about was that his mom had gotten a job, a full-time job. And he says, this is the first time in my life I've known that my mom has gotten a job. And he said, but what's more important, I told her that when she gets, the first thing she needs to do is to then go to the bank and open up a checking and a savings account. She'd never had one before. We know a lot of times people in our community are either unbanked and underbanked. And then he said, once you do this, when you get on your job, Mom, ask them if they have a 401k. And if they do, you need to save at 15%. Can you believe that? The 11-year-old took that information and that knowledge home to their parents. So I think that is you're spot on in terms of that education starting at that young age.
And Pam, kudos for you for doing that. We need to see Charran in schools. We need girls to see, you know what? This woman is a CEO of a construction company. My God, you'll be surprised. I think this is a longer conversation. We have to look at who's teaching our kids and what they're teaching our kids and why they're teaching our kids what they're teaching our kids. And are they teaching their children that? I don't think so. These are our babies. To see Charran, even I'm like excited. So, how do we share with our children who we are?
Yeah, Charran, you might be the only one there. And
I'm not a baby, but
yeah. Well,
you might be the only you out there. And I would say that just for statistics, that 30% of the Boston public schools, just to be very local, is Black students, 40% are Latino students, 90% of the teachers are white women. So we have a lot of work to do there. And there are some bills that are being filed this year that I will share with you all to be able to address that disparity in education, because our students become who they see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I also want to touch on, so many times when we talk about the wealth conversation for Black communities, it's about that generational challenge that exists. We don't necessarily always have that generational wealth that's generated in white families. And Charran, I'm interested a little bit about your journey. Not, maybe you don't have to take us from point A to point B, but was this something that was it something that you had to say, okay, this is happening at work and I want to be my own boss? And did you know how to access what it took to become a CEO?
No, and it's important to mention that I still struggle with these issues, right? And I'm just going to give you, so when I started, I was 23 years old, and here I am 23 years later. But it was a very, and it still is a male-dominated field, and a white male-dominated field at that. So being the only woman in the room, and not just the only woman, but the only woman of color. And it all started with me recognizing that there were a lot of these state contracts where there was a need for minority and women at the state level, and it just wasn't being fulfilled. So, and it's still not being fulfilled. And in saying that, I will tell you that I was recently involved in a project, and oftentimes we walk into the room and we know the reason we're at the table is to check a box, right? We're there because we're a minority, we're there because we're a woman. No one, I shouldn't say nobody, but very rare someone picks up the phone and calls you because they think you're qualified to do the job. Usually they're just trying to cover themselves and those goals on a project. So very often I feel that way. And the problem is that there's very little accountability. So you go into a project and you think, okay, this is great. I'm getting this work. I'm doing this work. And you realize after, again, I was used, I was manipulated. But it's difficult to draw the line, because it's always about the next project. Then, how do you move forward? How do you move forward? And I think often as minority companies, women companies, Black women companies, we're afraid of being stigmatized, and we don't want to be a snitch. We don't want to do the tell-all, because we know that there's repercussions, and we know that, especially, I hate to say it, especially where I'm at in Worcester, it's very difficult to break into that very tight-knit group. So it happens on every level. I mean, I think when I started, there was a lack of representation, obviously. I'm not even sure how many minority women-owned construction companies are here in Mass. I think I know probably 3 or 4 that probably do what I do. And I think I'm the only one in Central Mass. So just to give you an idea. And then when you think union companies, there's even less, because of the money it takes to really run a union company, and the payroll. I talk about the payroll all the time, because there's just, the payroll, the benefits, everything else that goes into having union employees. Excuse me. And it's I'm still a work in progress. So I hate when people say, "Oh, how'd you become successful?" I'm not, and I just feel like it's evolving. It's come a long way, but we're still not where we need to be as yet. And it's difficult to have those conversations, because who do you have those conversations with? How do you get to the table and tell somebody, like, look, this isn't right. This isn't right what you're doing. And how are you going to fix it? Right now, there's so many people that make promises. They, in light of the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, everybody's paying attention, but people aren't really putting their money where their mouth is. They're talking about it, but they're not actually doing anything about it. And it's very frustrating as a, Black woman business owner, because there's just injustice everywhere around me. And I think what people don't realize is, as Black women, there's sexism compounded with racism. So we're having to deal with so much on our plate at the same time.
Charran, I just want to say we're here for you to support you with those two bills that I mentioned earlier that we're trying to push to pass this year and that we support in general. The issue topic came about with the difference, trying to differentiate between a mandate and a benchmark. And so if you have a benchmark to reach a goal of X% of Black women in the field, you can say, hey, we tried to reach our benchmark, but we just couldn't quite do it. And that is unacceptable. We need to be setting mandates to ensure that Black women have equitable access, particularly in the construction field, to contracts. And so we look forward to supporting you moving forward. And I will definitely be calling you because this is the first time we came across paths, and I will be making sure that you're at those tables moving forward to be able to share your wisdom, because there's no reason why we cannot have mandates rather than benchmarks.
Thank you.
I love it. I always love it when the networking happens mid-panel, like perfect. That's awesome. And so we're going to turn to audience questions in a couple minutes. But before we do, I did want to give Bethiah and Pam the chance to, talk about their own visions for this economic agenda. And what are some other things that maybe you're not seeing that you hope come to fruition, especially as we enter this next chapter?
So I can start. I think going back to large companies, I think we should rethink the resources and the benefits that we make available to women. And oftentimes, we all know this, when you change the structure and the benefits for women, then everyone benefits, right? Because men want to benefit as well. So what we've been doing is looking at our child care benefits. We know a lot of women have had to downsize a bit due to the pandemic because they have to take care of their children. And we have men who want to do the same. So enhancing those child care benefits is a way that we could do it. Also, we're providing just social services. I mean, we've increased our access to resources. So if you are stressed, right, there is a resource for you. I know when I went 24/7, at home in the pandemic, and I was there with my 2 kids and my husband, and I'm getting stressed. I mean, I'm already stressed about work, right?
Oh,
but
yeah.
having resources
Doesn't sound stressful at all. What are you talking about?
and so having those outlets. And then I also think that we should think about more flexible work hours. And we've now realized that many people can work from home.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you need to pick up your kids, for those who are in school at 3:00, work with your employers, and they should be more flexible around, maybe you work from 9 to 2, right? And then get back on and then work from 5 to 7, or whatever works for you. I think in this environment, we need to pivot and be flexible and be more in tune with the needs of our workers, and particularly, I think, for our women, because they are trying to do so much. And I'd say to some women, this is what I've started to do. I read this great book by Tiffany Dufu. It's called Drop the Ball. Women, it's okay to drop that ball sometimes, because not everything is a priority.
I love Pam so much. That's why she's like my big sister. I want to be stressed and look as good as she looks while she's stressed. I don't look that good. I think about a number of things. Many of the women on this call are entrepreneurs, and I think Tiffany's book, Drop the Ball, is spot on. We don't have to be perfect at everything, even though our parents told us we had to be twice as good and we expect half the credit. We need to drop that ball too. But I often think about my sisters that are on this call and thinking about what you must feel. And the numbers bear this out, of employees who say that they're allies. They don't always take action for us, and we need to realize that. Of employees that say they're allies, 12% women and 8% men actually mentor or sponsor us. 32% women, 26% men actually take a public stand for us. So I'm going to ask all the men and everyone to take a public stand for us. I was on an email exchange that I thought was fascinating. We need transparency and we need information. And so this spreadsheet, I'm just going to call it the spreadsheet, and I'm willing to work with BECMA on this. So within the Jewish community, they put together a spreadsheet to get rid of gender disparity. So both men and women put on this spreadsheet the years of employment, their academic attainment, the type of job, where it was located in the United States, and their salaries. We do not have information about salaries. So if I'm negotiating with someone and I come out of someplace and I've been working hard, I'm post-grad, I'm this, that, and a third, and I'm the first person in my family to graduate, and I'm thinking, wow, they offered me $250, that's great. Do I know my white counterpart got $4? No. Do I know that Black man got $375? No. I'm thinking I'm negotiating. Maybe we started at $2 and I got to $250, and I think that's great. I don't even know where I can go. We need to make information transparent. So I'm saying to my brothers that are on this call and to us, we need to get serious and know what our worth is, be able to discuss it out loud and ask for it. The only way that you can really help me is to help me get to where my space of equity. And we keep salaries, we keep all of those things opaque. No one knows, but I thought this spreadsheet was fascinating, and hundreds of people completed this spreadsheet so that when Jewish women go in to negotiate their salary, they know what their male counterparts are making, and they can negotiate higher. They can walk in with confidence to say, this is the number. We need to do the same for our community.
I'd like to add on to that. I really love that, drop the ball. And I'm going to add to that and say also to pass the baton.
Yes.
I was 26 years old when I became a state representative, been here for a couple of years now. And upon the exit of our esteemed Senator, Linda Dorsina-Forey, I was the only Black woman in the legislature for upwards to a year plus and didn't have that mentorship. So I definitely want to also to encourage Black folks in general, if you don't have a mentee, please get a mentee, because your wisdom can spread very wide and far. And we definitely would appreciate that as the next generation coming up.
All right, let's turn to our audience Q&A. Those are all great. I'm saying final thoughts, but we're not done yet. So those are all great, kind of like put a pause on that part thoughts and let's go to our Q&A. So first, we do have a clarifying question for Bethiah. Someone's asking why you said the $8 stat from the Federal Reserve study isn't true, and I'd love to hear your clarification there.
Sure, and I would love to get it. Whenever we get information, we have to ask, where's that information coming from? What was in? How did you get in? Who was behind in? It was my understanding that in were a small segment of the population that they called on landlines. And I would like to know what Black person you're going to call on a landline and ask, how much do you have? What are your assets? And they're going to tell you the truth. First of all, I would like to know who's answering a landline. That's number one. And number two, what was in? And, we had to dig into that number to say, where did you get this number? How did you attain this number? And we found a lot of research discrepancy around that number. The calling on the landline. Who did you call? How did you get those names? And are they a real representative sample of us? Same thing that we noticed even with the current vaccine hesitancy conversation. We heard for months, Black people won't take this vaccine. Where are you getting that information? We have to ask these questions. What we found out, Black people were hesitant. We didn't say we're not taking it, we're hesitant, which is a totally different conversation, right? And then when the data came out from Pew, we were the smallest group. 25% of us said no. 28% of whites said no. The highest group, almost 50%, were white Republican men. So what we have to do when we get data, we have to ask, where is it coming from? look behind the numbers. What does N really represent? And what is the narrative behind that number? And so when we looked at N and we found out that it came from people that they called out of the phone book on landlines, we had doubt about that number. And actually, you can talk to the Federal Reserve. I think they have doubt around that number. But what that number also did, it created a narrative, right? Oh my goodness, we only have $8. But no, it didn't create the narrative on the other side of why do we only have $8? And it's not just financial literacy. I will say it goes back to the way that our assets are valued or devalued based on how I show up.
And also too, the narrative there is tainted because the narrative also doesn't state what are the opportunities that we have been denied access to.
That's
and
right.
That is why we don't have access to upward mobility, because we're constantly being denied access to different opportunities so that we can have a pathway out of poverty or a pathway for upward mobility. So great point.
Right, but you have to acknowledge there is a gap, and the gap exists. But the responsibility on narrowing that gap is both internal and external. And if the Federal Reserve and others are not looking at how my assets are valued or what I am paying for money or any of the factors that are impacting my wealth gap, then why are you putting this narrative out?
Mm-hmm. Thank you both for that. We another question here about, and I think this is at the general point of what we're talking about, financial literacy and those programs that help kids understand what financial literacy is, how to put that into practice. And so the question is, how do we find the balance of starting with them at that young age, but also making sure that they can get into programs that pay them to learn and follow up with them as they get older?
I can answer that question because that's definitely an education-oriented question. And ladies, feel free to chime in. That's a question that's directly focused, centered around our schools. That's the reason why we need to ensure that our students are having great academic experiences. It's not just about the curriculum, and it's not just about them being there 8 to 3, 9 to 5. It's about the entire experience. And if you're not, again, teaching them methods to be able to be competitive upon graduation of 12th grade, then we are failing our students. The Boston Public Schools, for example, has done away with the arts program, which has been detrimental to our students over the years. The Boston Public Schools has also did away with financial literacy and a plethora of other programs that create for more well-roundedness when it comes to our students for them to be competitive upon 12th grade. And that is concerning. And so when it comes to why are we, at $8 today, is because we don't have access to that education. And so we're pushing to make sure that our students have a great academic experiences because they deserve it and they can compete.
Our next question is, are there programs for Black women who want to start businesses but are not sure how?
Is that a me question?
It can be.
Sure. So, I mean, I don't know of any just for Black women, but there are organizations out there. I would recommend SCORE, which helps women start businesses through mentoring and education. There's also the SDO, the Supply Diversity Office, which you can become certified as a woman and a minority business enterprise, and then gain access to public projects. There's CWE, the Center for Women Enterprise. There's the Greater New England Minority Supplier Diversity Council. And I think they probably speak more to the private sector. The SBA is another great resource for federal projects. And I can't think of any more right now.
I would say, and I think you're right, Sharon, and I'm so sorry to speak over you. We need to make every program a Black woman program. Every single one of them, especially in this environment. Everyone is talking about us, from McKinsey to UGMA to BECMA. Every program is a Black women program. And when we find that they're not a Black women program, then we need to shut them down.
Well, we definitely need some policy changes, right? It starts with policy. And it's unfortunate, but so many things fly under the radar. It's I don't know. Like I said, it's very frustrating at times, but I don't know of any Black women programs.
You know what? I tend to agree with Bethiah a lot, and I would say you're right. I would not just look for Black women programs. I think it's broader. You look for everything. And I just remember, back when I was in law school in a study group, I didn't just have a study group of the Black law students. I had a study group of white women. I had a study group where I was with the white guys. I had a study group where they were mixed because I wanted to know how everyone was thinking. And I wanted to be able to have access to all of their resources as well. So I'd say, try to develop relationships. I always tell my team, relationships trump everything. And I have this motto, remember R before T, relationship before task. Develop those relationships. Go out to those or go into those organizations where it's not just Black women, but there are other folks, right? And you're not just networking. Networking means to me that you're just meeting people. You need to connect. ABC, always be connected. Connect with people. Get to know them one-on-one. Get to learn what they're doing. Get to learn how they got to where they are. And oftentimes, you know what people love? They love to talk about their success. They love to talk about them. So learn from them and then figure out a way how they can help you. So that's what I would offer up. You should be in all of these groups, not just Black women groups.
And I'd add to that. So I've never necessarily pursued an entrepreneurial track, but one thing that I've kept in mind since college is, apply for everything. And I'm never underqualified for it, right? Like, just go after it because you never know whose eye that's going to catch and who's going to say, like, that's an interesting business. Oh, this person sounds really interesting. And who knows, you might just end up getting like a $500,000 grant or something. I'm going to manifest that for all of you. Let's do one last question. What resources are available for Black philanthropic leaders that are looking to serve Black youth, specifically Black girls in the city of Boston?
So I'm going to
you know what I can say. Go ahead.
Pam, please do.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the new Commonwealth Fund.
Yes.
That a group of 19 senior executives in Massachusetts started. I'm one of the co-founders. What we do is we focus on providing support primarily to Black-led nonprofit organizations. And actually, our new grant process just opened up for the spring. Last November, we gave out $1 million in terms of grants. It was $50,000 to 20 organizations that were run by either Black or Latinx folks. And we're getting ready to do the same thing. It's the new Commonwealth Fund. And you can just go to our website and get some information there and apply. I think the process ends on April 9th in terms of, just getting background information. And we hope to give out at least $1 million or more later this spring.
So Pam said exactly what I was going to say. And that is important, that not only we go to that fund to access fund, but we also support that fund because you can donate there as well. And we want to make sure that not only are we supporting, but we're building the capacity of Black leaders to support our children, because this is really the next pipeline. And what I think is amazing about the Black Commonwealth Fund, they have a pipeline of leaders that from various backgrounds throughout, that you can think of, whether it's business, whether it is philanthropic, whether it's government, that are all a part of this new Commonwealth Fund. And I find it to be very exciting. And I think for everyone on this call, this is an opportunity for you to get involved, whether to give, whether you can recommend the fund to your community, and also it's Massachusetts wide.
Great. Thanks for sharing that resource, you two. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. We could talk about this all night, but I know people have other places to be and things to do. But I want to say a big thank you to each and every one of our panelists. to everyone who tuned in, and especially to BECMA for this. I have really learned a lot. Really appreciated being in your presence and learning so much from the panelists and from the audience and the questions that you have. And I think we all know that this is not something that obviously is going to be solved tonight, but it's building blocks, and we're better when we do it together. So I'm glad that we've all been connected. And I also want to point out to the earlier question with what resources are available for Black women entrepreneurs. There's also BECMA as a resource. And I think I don't want to speak for BECMA, but I think it's safe if you are interested in learning more about our panelists or getting in touch with them in some way or another, you can probably reach out to BECMA to do that. So with that said, thank you all. I hope you have a great evening. Please stay safe. Please do your research on your vaccine. If you haven't yet, if you're still on the fence and trying to decide, make sure you make a well-informed decision. Rep Tyler's putting her contact info in. Oh, sorry, no, sorry, but sorry, my fault. That was a faux pas. But yeah, you can contact her office. I think if you Google State Rep Tyler's office, you can contact her office. There you go. And yes, so thank you all, ladies. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And thank you, BECMA.
Thank you very much.